Morning, Chris. How you doing today?
Hi, Ron. Doing great. How about yourself?
Can't complain. So today it's really exciting. We just released earlier this week. We released the marketplace tips and tricks on how to grow your marketplace part one. Today we're going to move into part two, and the topics that we're going to cover today are leveraging deep learning and personalization. And so we're going to dive into those. So I'm going to give just a quick example, and then I want you to really dive in and start hitting the technical aspects of that. So one of the things that I always give as an example when I'm talking to people is this concept of between personalization and deep learning, how does it benefit me? Well, if you think about it this way, what about if I had a website and my marketplace was something similar to a Home Depot and we were selling all kinds of tools? And I didn't really know what my people were doing when they were coming. I don't know what they were browsing. I don't know what they were looking at. I don't know what they were buying. I don't know a lot about them. I just know that they come to buy tools for DIY projects from me, right? But what if I had, using a machine learning module and deep learning, what if I had some rules set up that could learn their behavior such that when Chris comes to my site, and he pokes around. He doesn't have a login. He pokes around for half an hour and then he leaves. But we analyze what he poked around, and 90% of the time he was looking at hand tools, and only 10% of the time he was looking at power tools. So the next time Chris visits the site, up pops a coupon for 10% off all hand tools because that's the propensity that he has to look at. But we didn't get him to convert and buy anything. So this time we're going to get him to buy a hand tool because he loves the hand tools. That's something that deep learning, machine learning, and personalization can do. It can read and learn and react based on the behaviors and learning habits of what the people are that come to the site. And that's really where you want to benefit. So I love giving that example because that could completely change things. And I'm not even a player in this, right? We set it up and the system learns their behavior and can react to that behavior, right? So go ahead and expound on that. I know that that's not specific deep learning, and I know that that's not specific. That's a little more personalization than deep learning, but it definitely has something to do with learning. You're the AI guy, so I'm going to lean into you on this one for sure today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's the real power, though, of AI is that it can be used for personalization and generally for intelligence that is at a new level of capability compared to what we've seen in the past. And this ultimately ends up driving a lot of value for the end user and making it a sort of paradigm shifting experience in general. So I think that's exactly where we want to go with it. In many cases for a client is looking at personalization, looking at sort of big data and analyzing that in a way that's smart, that then applies to each persona and then each individual user based on their interaction with the site. Now, some of the mechanics behind this are really interesting. Um, as it turns out, there are different ways of approaching AI, different models. You'll typically hear it referred to as where the model, you could think of it, a model for AI as a way of approaching a set of data. So there are different models that are sort of common. Typically, you have large language models. So these are going to be really focused on essentially getting large amounts of text data essentially from the web, possibly from your particular client, or in the case of a marketplace, your particular user, they may have information that they want to upload, or just data that they're interacting with on the site that we can actually learn from. And so these large language models will have this extremely deep set of information from data crawled on the internet, data crawled on different sort of sets of interactions with customers, for example, and so on. where the AI will have experienced what a general context should be for interacting with a customer. And then what we typically will do is fine tune, train that model. So you will probably have heard of Bloom AI or Llama 2, etc. These are all large language models that are open source that can be used on a project where you can fine tune train that model to match your business. So I like to present, Ron, that whenever we're doing, personalization or, adapting the user interface for a particular user or persona, it really makes sense to fine tune train the model that we're going to use so that we can make it really specific to that business and that user type. The way to do that is essentially providing good information from your business and for that type of user, that's sample data that the AI can go through and see what their sort of like text based requests might be or interactions might be, and what the ideal response is. And so this is referred to as fine tuning training. I like to call it, essentially it's like a college grad going to get their first job, and whenever they work at their first job, they don't necessarily have the on the job training. They just have this general knowledge. What fine tuning training is essentially on the job training for the AI so it can learn your business. So it can learn about your marketplace and your industry. And this, as you can imagine, can be very powerful. So just take an example where someone is operating a automotive marketplace, and they in particular focus on performance parts. So they have performance parts, and they want to have a really awesome chatbot that can interact with customers that's fine-tuned trained for this industry. They also want to have the ability to recommend things in email, in throughout the site, and intelligently as the user is going through their experience. So they might actually be a first time visitor. And then whenever they return, we want to show them sort of like typical next steps that they might take, or tips and recommendations for areas they may not have explored yet. And so these are all opportunities that we can take advantage of with AI, by leveraging the data about this business, and then also incorporating data about this user, and marrying those together. And without going into all of the details, it's very common to combine models. So I just talked about large language models. You also have, image generation. The most common nowadays is diffusion. So you'll have basically this capability to generate imagery. This can also be really helpful, depending on your business model and what you might want to generate images for. The images could actually be generated for products and categories. I will say that they're not overly accurate unless you have a lot of data. So you're going to sort of, with images, want to get a lot of good data to be able to generate good images. But so large language models, diffusion for imagery. And then you also have this concept of really dealing with big data. There are several different sort of prominent models, but as it turns out, in a lot of cases, just a decision tree ends up being quite powerful. And this is commonly used with the analytics side of the data, both on an aggregate level and then for the individual user. So the way that this would work is we would typically marry several of these models. So again, kind of think of it as like several college students who just graduated, and you've hired them to help all of your users on your site have a great experience. One of them really specializes in, communicating with your user. Another one really specializes in analyzing what their browsing history was compared to other users' browsing history, and then cross-referencing what they might be interested in seeing based on this particular user's browsing history as a sort of like projection onto similar users. And so these two, AI models are combining, and we're wiring it up so that the end user, all they see, all this complication aside, all they see is basically this really intelligent set of recommendations. text and content that is specific to your marketplace, to your particular industries that you focus on, and then essentially an experience that adapts with the user as they interact with the site. And I think this is something that's really similar in feel. It's certainly not the same fidelity yet as working with a real person, but it's very similar in feel to working with a real person. And it's a major progression over previous interaction styles with a website that doesn't leverage AI.
Yeah. And I love to think like you got this big, huge. You've talked about the college grads, but I mean, it's really the power of a huge workforce. But it's basically like you've hired 100 bodies to come over and do a bunch of work in the yard. They have no idea what to do, but they're there, they're ready, they're willing, and they have all this experience of what they can do. They know how to cut trees and pull, trim grass, and they know how to do everything. But until you tell them how you want it and tell how you want your yard styled and how you want, this yard manipulated, manicured, they're not going to be able to do anything. And that's when Chris uses that term train. I love train the AI, right? And then you've got fine tune the AI. So you have to train the AI so it has experience. So when Ron comes to Chris's automotive website and says, I have a C7 Corvette with an LS3, there are a number of things that AI engine can do. One, it could do some data analysis and say, these are the top selling performance parts that people who have LS3s typically buy. Or it could start going, what are you looking for today? And I could go in and start asking some very intelligent questions like, well, I'm thinking about replacing my air intake, or I need to increase horsepower by 10%, or I'm looking for a better exhaust, but I don't want it too loud. It has to take in all these parameters, and then based on those additional parameters and what it's learned and been trained to do, then it can go do all of this other work on the back end for you. I know one of the things, we've had a couple projects, Chris and I were literally talking about it last night. We've got some medical projects that we've been doing recently where we've been doing AI engines for the intake of patients. So a patient can call up and go, I have a sore throat, I have this, I have that, I have whatever. And the AI goes in and starts asking specific questions so it knows from a hospital intake which specialist, which office, or to send them to the ER, or to just tell them to take their temperature, take some Tylenol, double it up with Advil because they can have both. Call back in an hour with the results of their temperature, and we'll give them some additional guidance, right? And so we're using AI for a lot of different things. I know being in marketing, I use AI every day for SEO, right? And so I'm using it for content writing and SEO and data analysis. Now we're talking about the marketplace. And so your marketplace is going to be very different. Chris gave you a simple example of an automotive marketplace, but what do you want your users to do? And if you think about it, if I had another 15 employees literally sitting on the marketplace, waiting for live chat, waiting for people to ask questions, watching what people are doing on the site and going, hey, I noticed you looked at 3 air intakes. Did you know that we've got that one, the second one you looked at on sale for $50 off? If you had 15 people literally on your website watching your buyers come in, ready to answer questions, what would you have them do? What would you train them? What would you want them to do to help convert and service your customers? That's what your AI is. Your AI is those 15 people sitting on your website watching everything that everybody does on the website. What do you want to train them and what do you want to do? And that's what working with a consultant like Clarity can do, because you literally have to train it. It's not enough to have 15 people sitting there watching if they don't know what to do. If you don't tell them, hey, we're trying to push K&N this month because K&N, we have bigger profit margin, or we're overstocked, or we have a deal on K&N, we'd like to see how many we can push. Or here's a product, we got 10,000 widgets in, but we need to push them. Whatever it is, if they don't know what to do, which is the training, then they're not going to accomplish what your needs are. It's not enough to just plug in an AI tool without the training, without the guidance, right? And so that's the big thing about the training. Is there anything else about deep learning, Chris, that, like for me, I understand AI, I use it every day. I understand the concept of training, and I understand personalization really well, obviously being in marketing. The one thing that always confuses me that maybe I can get you to explain a little better is the deep learning. What is the deep learning? What does quote unquote deep learning really mean to me if I come to Clarity and I'm looking to have you build me a marketplace or potentially embed AI into my marketplace? How do I benefit from deep learning, and what are you offering from a consultant who understands what deep learning is?
Yeah, great question. Well, I would say at its base, deep learning is essentially, in many cases, I mean, there are different approaches to it that matter a lot based on the data. So, sort of the first part of it is understanding the scenario and the data. Um, a lot of times there will be sort of just a bias from a consultant or a team member that they want to use a certain approach to solve the problem, and it's just not the right model or the right approach to handle this type of data. This is probably very similar to different people and different personalities. You can think of it the same way because, some people are just not appropriate to run a company. They would lose their minds. Some people are not appropriate to do accounting because they're not detailed and they would never, cross T's and dot I's properly. Some people are not appropriate to do software development. You get the idea. And, the list goes on. And it's the same thing in general, with the AI models and generally with deep learning and how we approach it. So one of the first things that you want to do is make sure you're working with somebody who's actually stepping back, understanding the whole context, and understanding your business and your sort of output, your desired output from this, as well as providing creative suggestions based on, really synthesizing all of the potential in your space. So that's the first thing. Build the right team of AI models to use. And then ultimately, the next step is, of course, what exactly is this? Well, if it's appropriate to use a AI model for your scenario, because in some cases it's not necessary. In some cases, you can just use a really simple decision tree and off you go. And that actually ends up being as good or better than a deep learning, AI model, believe it or not. And a decision tree is just a really simple logic tree that has sort of yes or no questions based on the data. And there's an analytical approach to, analyzing a bunch of data and then applying a decision tree to that and comparing that to the performance of different AI models. Okay. So the idea is that we want to go with what's best for your marketplace and for your business, not what is the fanciest, coolest AI tool out there. We want what best serves your end customer. In the case where an AI model makes a lot of sense, the way I like to summarize it is AI at its very core. Typically, whenever you're literally getting into the neural network side of it, all that it is a curve fit. So you will probably remember, back in some of your math classes in middle school or high school, where you would do curve fits, where you would have several points and you would be tasked with, putting the right coefficients on a formula to fit the curve. And that is literally all that AI does at its core. It's literally just taking the data that you have for this particular area and it is curve fitting at scale. So it's doing it with tons of data. And so what I would say as a sort of a summary is that the more good data that we have, the more it's almost an exponential increase in the value of the big data analysis. So if we have really good data and we have lots of it, then the big data analysis, as we're doing a curve fit, it's going to be really helpful. And so the summary of what it is it's basically taking all of the data that is, in most cases going to be training data that we're going to train the system with. It's, in other words, we know that this input should result in this output. Whenever a user goes to this cart page, we want them to check out at this percentage. If they're not, then what was their path browsing on the site before that? Okay, maybe we need to change that path. okay, if we change the path to be something different or show them something different, they convert at a higher rate. Now we're going to do a curve fit against that data. We're going to see which sort of predecessory steps or presentation sort of data sets, which ones of those work to get a higher conversion rate. And then you just do this at scale. Um, and that's basically, deep learning. It's going to be looking at that data and doing this curve fit and doing it across a lot of information. The other thing that I'll say is that it's really important to have the system keep learning, and essentially continue to adapt as a feedback loop into this model. And I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but that's sort of a summary, is that we're taking the data on, that we're generating from your site and that we have and we can collect, and we're trying to get the data to be as precise and high fidelity as possible. And then we are just doing a curve fit, and we want to choose the right fitting model. And I don't want to oversimplify it. There's a lot of nuance to it, but that's kind of a generalization of what this deep learning is. It's essentially a curve fit of your data to produce a really valuable output.
That sounds great. I appreciate that. So it sounds like the deep learning, the AI, really has two main goals. One goal is the second half of what we talked about, was the personalization, right? It's to customize the user experience, enhance the user experience, um, almost have ESP to know what they're thinking. So every time they make a click, we put the right information that would give them the answer they're looking for, the next piece of data they're looking for. They click on something, we offer them the batteries that are needed for that specific unit. All the assumptions, right? We're trying to make assumptions to make that experience perfect. And obviously, from a business perspective, for us, the most revenue generating, right? So if they come in and buy a computer, we obviously want to ask them about the warranty, and we want to ask them about, if it's a laptop, a case. We want to ask them about a mouse. We want to ask them about an external monitor, backup drive. We want to ask them all the questions so that we can maximize their experience, both to make it a better user and buying experience, but also to maximize our profit and revenue. So personalization is a big one. But another one that we really haven't talked about is, as you keep mentioning, the data. What do we do with all that data? There is so much analysis, right? I mean, you and I live in marketing, and so I can't tell you the number of reports and analytics and stuff that you and I do to swizzle data, right? I mean, we're data hounds. We literally live in the data. Why are we living in the data? Because business intelligence, right? We believe that data, live data, real data, rather than just making hypotheses and gut feelings, right? If we take real data to make business decisions, then they're usually smarter decisions, right? And they're decisions that we can measure their impact. If I know that I've got, and just make up any number, a 43% conversion rate based on this type of activity, if I want to go in and A/B test that activity or messaging or user workflow, and I can go back and say that the new workflow produced 41%, I might think it's really successful if I'm not measuring the exact numbers. But when I see I just went from 43% to 41%, even though we're getting a lot of sales, maybe those sales are a little bit bigger. So I think I'm making more revenue. And so I make the wrong decision to convert to a new workflow that's actually generating less revenue on a percentage basis, right? So, in my opinion, personalization is number one and the biggest reason why AI is really important. But the second one is, when you get all this data, how do you analyze the data? Sometimes there's so much data. You hear the term, what is it? Analysis paralysis, right? You hear that all the time. You get so much data. I mean, how many years, Chris, have you and I fought to figure out all of the analytic stuff that you and I talk about, right? It's a constant battle to try to get and collect all the data that we could possibly make decisions from. And so we figure it out to collect all the data, but now we have so much data, there's too much data to give us all the information. And so then we take forever to try to figure out all the different ways to slice and dice the data and give us the information. And that's another thing that AI can do, right? AI can do, and I'd like you to talk briefly about that, and then we'll close it out because personalization kind of was the second part. And I think AI, for the most part, and almost the whole conversation today, has really been about training your AI for personalization so that the user's buying experience is enhanced, right? When they click on a laptop, maybe I show two different lists on the right hand side, a list of accessories for that specific laptop, and then maybe if I analyze that laptop, see that it's a gaming laptop, maybe the second list is, by the way, here are the top 3 selling gaming laptops that we carry right now. So we're giving them not only accessory options to upgrade and enhance this laptop, but if they're doing research on which is the best gaming laptop, maybe we're also recommending what the top selling laptops are in that particular category, all at the same time, right? So personalization is king. Second, I'd love you to talk briefly, and then we can close this out. How can AI help you and I, the business owners now, take all of this stuff that we've gathered from AI and either do analytics or make business decisions from all this data?
Absolutely. I think that's really the promise of the big data side of things. And in most cases, what we find is that a lot of the data that's really helpful is simple. And frankly, it isn't even getting analyzed sort of at a most foundational level, just because the business has grown at a rapid pace. It may just not have had the attention that it could, it could really optimally sort of benefit the business from. And so a foundational set of analysis of just what information is going to be most helpful, reduce the latency on that data, but then ultimately leveraging AI can sort of be a second or third level of sort of detail that goes into this analytics. And this is really powerful. And I won't go into the weeds on exactly, all of the nuance of it. I would just say in general that there does tend to be sort of a progression from basic blocking and tackling with data and analytics that is foundational first. Then, as the business has that in place, then it will tend to make sense to leverage AI and deep learning to help make the right decisions. What this looks like, though, is literally mining the data to see what products might have a higher profit margin from ERP data that are not selling as well because they're just not presented to the user. But when the user does see them, they typically make a purchase. So we could boost the results on the site for these higher profit margin products as long as they're something that is valuable to the end user. Another thing that we might see is like some products have a better product description, or some categories have a better description, or they maybe even have a video on them. Any of those tend to have a higher conversion rate. So let's get more of those on the site. And getting this data to the business decision-making team members is absolutely critical. So I think that the power of the AI is that it will adapt to the situation. It doesn't just have to have it sort of spoon-fed to it as to what we're looking for. It can find information that's really powerful. It does help to start sort of like pointing it in the right direction, and then it sort of gives us the precision that we wouldn't have gotten. I like to see it as like pointing a telescope. Telescopes are great. You can look at planets and stars and different unique features in the night sky, right? You can even look at things in the daytime. But if you're not pointed in the right direction, no matter how much you focus or tune things in, you're not really going to see the detail on something because you're not even pointed in the right direction. So I like to sort of caution around that, point the telescope in the right direction and then focus in. And it is incredible what you can see with AI about your business and decisions that you should be considering making once you are sort of pointed in that right direction. And it's incredible. I mean, it will literally help you to expose decisions that are so creative because it sort of doesn't have the natural constraints and biases that we do. It's just looking at the data. So it's
Yeah.
sort of agnostic to the tendencies that we have that bias the decision making. And it just goes for what we tell it to go for. So I think it's really, really powerful. I always want to make sure that, as a business, you're thinking about setting this up in the right way. And I would use this telescope analysis or analogy rather, to kind of help point you in the right direction there.
Yeah, I agree. It definitely looks further and at more things than we can possibly ever look at,
Yes.
right? That's the one thing that AI has that we don't, is the capability of having a billion eyes, right? Almost that way. So thanks for joining today. That concludes part 2 of the series. Part 3, we're going to cover Web3. We're going to cover payment methods, how to convert your data into BI, and ongoing security and performance planning. If you want to talk about your marketplace or want to talk about what marketplace costs or how to leverage AI, please go on our website, clarity-ventures.com. Request a quote, which will schedule a demo with me. I'd love to jump on a call with you and talk. Or make sure to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel, and we'll keep you up to date. Thanks for joining me again. Bye for now.
Thanks. Bye for now.